Today we are excited to explore the visibility of archaeological social networks model with the expert who created it. So, could you start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yes. So my name is Claudine Gravel Miguel. I am currently a research scientist at the New Mexico Consortium, but when I was working on this model, I was a postdoc at ASU, Arizona State University. I have a PhD in archaeology, well, anthropology, but an archaeology focus, mainly looking at social networks and human environmental interactions in the Upper Paleolithic of Europe.
Thank you. Let's begin by discussing the inspiration behind your work. What motivated you to create this model?
So the model that we're talking about in particular was kind of a simplification of a model that I used for my dissertation, which was a big model that had a lot of stuff in it. And so, as I said, I'm an archaeologist focusing on prehistoric, especially Paleolithic stuff. And we don't really have a lot of information about what we're missing or what we're not missing in the archaeological record. So I thought that using an agent-based model would be a great way to kind of just test what can we say with what we find in the archaeological record, especially of the Paleolithic, when we know that we're missing a lot of information, a lot of artifacts that have not preserved, but also just missing sites as well. So that was the main idea. Try to see what can we say, what should we not say from the archaeological record.
Moving on, I'm curious about you know what's the main goal of this model, how this model works, and what's the main goal of this model?
So the main goal is to quantify how much how much we can say about social networks in the Paleolithic. So as a Paleolithic archaeologist, some people tend to look at similarities in objects found in different sites to say, okay, the people who were making those two objects in two different sites knew each other because the style is similar. And that's a method that's pretty common. But I wanted to quantify or to just test, is it actually accurate when we look at multiple different sites that maybe they're not contemporaneous, maybe people have moved between them. Can we actually say that those are social networks, or that they show that people had contact between each other? Or is there something else at foot that could have created those similarities, like indirect transmission of style, or just basically migration of style, migration of people? So that was the goal of this model, is to test how how accurate is a reconstruction of a social network from the artifact, from what we know are the direct interactions from people. So the model allows us to track everything because I'm creating everything. So I know exactly who had contact with whom, and I can create a network from that. And then I calculate similarities of objects that were created by the people in that network, and I create a network from that, and I compare the two networks. Are they similar or not? And in which situation are they better? Are they more similar, or are they less similar?
What about the hurdles you encountered? What major challenges did you face during the model's development?
I think the biggest hurdle would have been to simplify enough that the model was applicable to a lot of different
Hmm.
time periods or people or situations, without making it so general that uh, it wasn't telling much. Um, as I said, this was kind of a simplification of a much more complicated model that I already created. So just simplifying a previous model was also quite difficult. I was reading my ODD protocol, and there's a sentence in there that says, there's one thing that I have that's kind of superfluous in this model, but it would have taken so much time to just remove it, and it doesn't really have much impact, so I just left it. But when you look at the model, you're like, why do you have two types of campers? Like there could be only one, and it would be fine. But just the simplification, like changing the code was quite complicated. I didn't want to break it. So
So now let's talk about the outcomes of your research and outcome of this model. What key discoveries have emerged from this model?
so big caveat, I wrote this model in 2020 for a paper that just got published like in 2023. It was in the edited volume, so it took quite a bit of time. So for most of that time, the model was not published on comsys.net, so it was not visible to other people, and also the paper itself was not published. I couldn't really do anything with it. And since I started working on it, I actually changed job twice, so I kind of moved a little bit on from that project. But what I can say from the paper that we published that is still relevant is that this model helped me at least quantify the fact that when we do use stylistic similarities between objects to reconstruct the social networks of the past, we have to be really careful because we won't be able to reconstruct the real social networks from people, the real interactions. In fact, the more artifacts we have and the more complex, the more we can say about the network from those artifact similarities, the more we might actually reconstruct interactions between people that never happened, that are just visible through that would have happened, that those similarities would have happened because of indirect transmission of style. So if an individual from site A goes to site B, transfers some style there, and then an individual from site B goes to site C and transfers some style there, then we might see some similarities between site A and site C, and we might say, hey, they were in contact when they actually were not. So we have to kind of work with this balance between trying to reconstruct so much that we're actually creating false data versus trying to reconstruct enough that we can actually talk about who had most likely contact with whom. So that actually helped quantify this thought that I think most people kind of had a hunch that it was happening, but this actually proves it.
You have archived this model on comsys.net. What challenges did you encounter in sharing and archiving this model on the website?
Challenges on archiving it itself, none. It's pretty straightforward. Obviously, you have to work on the documentation. I think, I try to make sure that my code is well commented. My ODD protocol is understandable. So that was pretty good. I'd say a challenge would be to disseminate the product after it's been published. I kind of rely on the fact that my paper cites it, and also, as I said, I've moved on from jobs, so I'm not trying to talk about it on Twitter. So it would just be, I'm kind of letting it spread to other people by itself, which does not help other people find it, for example.
And finally, let's look to the future. What's next in this area of research and for this model? Are there more studies or updates planned?
For that model specifically, I'm pretty much done on it. But as I was finishing it, I started working with two PhD students, Robert Bischoff and Cecilia Padilla Iglesias. Robert is a PhD student at ASU. Cecilia is in Zurich, and we started working on a slightly more complicated version of this model. That would be that would take into consideration a little bit more social factors that could impact who has contact with whom and how artifacts are produced and all that. So something that would be a little bit more realistic, and I kind of moved away from that project. So I know they're still working on it. They're presenting on it at conferences, but me personally, I'm not involved in that anymore just because I have a job that does not allow me to work on it. That would not allow me to work on it anymore anyways. So so that's what's happening. I hope that people keep working on it. I think it's a fantastic subject, especially for Paleolithic archaeology, which is a top, like it's a period where studying social networks is quite difficult because we don't have a lot of data. So I think I'm glad that Robert and Cecilia kind of took the torch and are continuing working on it because they're doing fantastic work. So
Thank you for sharing your insights on this interesting model.
thank you for having me.